Hi. Okay, so it kind of starts back in the summer, but over the past couple months, I felt like God has been teaching me over and over again what He wants me to do next in ministry. And I've always dreamed of being a teacher in the inner city and learning how to minister to those around me. And so I moved to Flint from a suburban church with a huge desire to work in the inner city. And David and I got married with those same goals in mind. But then I had my student teaching, and I realized that teaching in a classroom wasn't exactly suited to me the way that I thought it would be. And then we started having kids, and so my ministry completely changed after that. And so now what? I had to figure out what the Lord was calling us to do. And so this summer, I started doing a Bible study on the book of James. And I had read The Tongue Our Measure with one of our books here and went through James at the same time because it went over a verse in James. And it was just really beautiful how the Lord was using His word to impress upon my heart what He wanted me to do next. So James 2 says, if a brother or sister is poorly clothed and lacking in daily food, and one of you says to them, go in peace, be warmed and be filled, without giving them the things that are needed for the body, what good is that? So I really felt the burden to live that out. And that's what our faith is supposed to be. It's supposed to be living out, being the hands and feet of Jesus and serving others. And later in James 5, it says, your riches have rotted and your garments are moth-eaten. Your gold and silver have corroded. The harvesters are crying out against you, and their cries have reached the ears of the Lord. You have lived on the earth in luxury and in self-indulgence. And then Deuteronomy 15 says, if you have one of your brothers should become poor in any of your towns within your land, and the Lord your God is giving you, you shall not harden your heart or shut your hand against them. But you shall open your hand to them and lend them sufficient for his need, whatever it may be. And so God gives us a lot of commands in the Bible to be hospitable, to care for those around us, to take care of the poor among us, the sojourner, the widow, the fatherless. And so as I was going through James, I was really trying to figure out what I can do in that. And what really was pressed on my heart was the refugee crisis that is going on right now. And it breaks my heart to see the living conditions that they're living in. But there's not a lot I can do about that. I don't live down there. I can't find I don't know, reputable places that I can send stuff or, whatever. And so wanting to do something tangible, again, it was pressed upon my heart that there are people in my own neighborhood that I can minister to. And so then as fall came, I started studying Acts with the Bible study that I go to. And the description of the church is so beautiful in Acts 2. It says, and they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and the fellowship and to the breaking of bread and in prayer. And then it also says, all who believed were gathered together. They had all things in common. And they were selling their possessions and belongings and distributing the proceeds to all as any had need. And it was just really amazing to show how loosely we need to hold our things. And so it made me think of my old church. It took me a long time. It took me 3 years to get really plugged in and be able to feel at home with the people in my church. And it was nothing against them. It was just me. I had a hard time with that. And lately I've been learning what it is to disciple and what that should look like. And so I feel like the Lord has really shown me how I can minister in this season, and being able to even get closer with the body here, because we've been learning to disciple with each other and to disciple one another. And it's been a beautiful thing to be encouraged to have those relationships with each other and to fellowship with each other. And it's been, 3 years, so about the same amount of time that it's taken me to get to that point here too. But the Lord has also brought people into our path that we're able to help in various ways through discipleship, through teaching them different things that the Lord has given us. So when I was pregnant with Nora, I had a really hard time knowing how I fit into ministry. I taught in children's church, and that was great, but there was something tangible that I couldn't really do as much of. Because I was pregnant, I couldn't go and lift water cases when there was the water crisis that went on. I couldn't go out in the heat because I was pregnant, and I couldn't handle it. And so I was very limited in what I could do, and I felt that. And so it was really difficult because I'm like, what do I do? Like, I want to ministry. I want to be the hands and feet of Christ, but I don't know how to do that. I don't know what that should look like, especially being a mom. But that's the really cool thing about hospitality is I can do that in my home. I can do that when I'm feeding my son. I can do that when I need to do school with my kids. Or when I have laundry that's piling up, or I can do it when my kitchen is dirty because I've been making someone a meal, and I don't have to feel bad about my kitchen being a mess because I was making like there's so many things that go along with that. And that's the part of being hospitable. And so I've been reading The Gospel Comes with a House Key, which is amazing, by Rosaria Butterfield. And it just has been really profound and eye-opening for me. So she says that living out radical, ordinary hospitality leaves us with plenty to share because we intentionally live our lives below our means. She also says that God calls us to make sacrifices that hurt so that others can be served, and we are called to die, nothing less. So God showed me in the book of James that I needed to help take care of people's needs. Acts showed me that I needed to hold on to things loosely and be willing to let go of everything in order to be hospitable and to care for people. And this book has showed me what that can look like. And so I learned recently of this idea that in Acts, the new Jewish believers were selling their inheritance, the lands that God had given them, in order to take care of the people that had need, the believers that had need. And this was a huge step of faith for them. They had for so long been tied to the land and tied it with God's blessings and with their relationship with God. And now they were willing to sell what they had in order to care for those in the body, because now their relationship was tied to Jesus and what Jesus was calling them to do, and that's what I want to do. So Rosaria talks about how we love to hear stories about Jesus feeding the 5,000, his divine healing and his contagious grace, but we miss that we're supposed to replicate that in ordinary, non-miraculous ways. He fed their souls with his word, but he also fed their bellies with the food that was needed. And our homes and our things are not ours. They're to be held loosely because that's a blessing that God has given us. And we are to be the hands and feet of Jesus. One of the lessons from my Bible study in James, Jen Wilkin, who did the Bible study, said that God tells us to ask for our daily bread. Why would he have us ask that if he didn't intend to give it? And maybe someone that is asking is supposed to get it from us. And then she also said that God has all the money that he needs, but it's in our pockets. And so we need to use that for his glory. And so David and I, we do this thing where 3 times a year we go over our family needs. We call it a family planning meeting. We do this so that we can talk about where we're at spiritually, what we need to do about our budget, if it needs to stay the same, if we need to change it, what we do about the kids and their school, and what needs to get done around the house. But recently, this last one that we had, we talked about who we should be discipling and who the Lord has been laying on our hearts and how we can serve our community better, and it's been awesome. So like I said, one of the things Rosaria talked about was that sometimes we're called to die. Sometimes being hospitable is really easy because we're asking people from our church to come in and it's building up and it's fellowship. But sometimes it's really hard. Sometimes we have to call people out on their sin because that's also what we're commanded to do. Sometimes it's just being uncomfortable because we don't know anyone, like someone very well. But that is what God has called us to do. And sometimes it's not a lot of fun and sometimes it hurts a little bit. But one of the things that it's been really cool to see is that a couple years ago, I really wanted to open up our home more. I wanted to have people over more. But David said that he didn't really want to. He wanted to limit it because he's an introvert, if you haven't noticed. And so having that many people over all the time was just kind of overwhelming to him. But it does help that he came from a big family, so he's learned to deal with it. But in his own home, it just seemed like a lot what I was expecting from him. But it's really cool because now I asked him after we had Ollie, and we've been reading through these things, like how he's been doing with all of it, because I don't want to like overwhelm him too much. But it's been really cool because sharing with him that like it's supposed to be uncomfortable makes him okay with being uncomfortable. He's an introvert, but it's stretching his muscles, so to speak, and allowing people in our home, because that's what God has called us to do, and he's willing to do that. And so every once in a while I still check and I'm like, how are you doing? Am I overwhelming you? Are we doing too much? But it's been really cool, and we just got sick, getting over being sick, so that kind of slowed us down for a while anyway. But it was really hard as a new mom with Della and Nora, especially knowing where I fit in with ministry. And I know that my children are my first ministry, but I always felt like there was another aspect of what that should look like. And so now, like I said, I can have people over and I can talk to them while I'm nursing. I can have someone over while I'm folding my laundry and talking with them when their house is getting worked on and they need to be out of their house. And it's really cool because I have a friend that I learned what hospitality can look like with. And it's great because we learned that hospitality doesn't really need to be fancy. We knew that we could come in our pajamas without our hair being brushed and being utterly exhausted and just spend time with each other and give each other that grace that we both needed, and especially for the estate of our houses because we have small children and sometimes it's exhausting. But it's beautiful because that helped us start to learn what that was supposed to look like. And so now, like, we take turns opening our home. She'll come over one week and I'll make lunch and she helps me clean it up, and then I return the favor and help her clean it up, and our kids play together, and it's awesome and it's simple. And so now our biggest challenge is figuring out what all of this should look like with those around us, to our neighbors. So this last summer, we'd been out more with my garden, and we'd been able to meet some new people that lived in our area. Our neighborhood used to be like there were so many houses that weren't filled. But this summer, a lot of people started coming back to our street. And so we have this one young guy who comes by often. It first started by him asking if he could mow our lawn. And then he would come over and see if he could borrow things from David. And every once in a while he comes and asks if he can sell us something a little sketchy. But it's kind of cool because like we're starting to get to the point where we think we can invite him into our home. Usually we go out onto the porch and talk to him, but we're getting closer to the place of being able to invite him in. And then we also have a family that lives down the road. I'm not entirely sure how many kids that live in the house with them, but there's two girls that would come and they asked if they could pull our weeds. Well, when you come over and over and over again, we only have so much money and so many weeds that need to be pulled. And so now we're trying to figure out ways that we can bless them and have a relationship with them, despite not being able to employ them in a task to give them money. And of course, with all things come the need for wisdom, but God says that if we ask for it, he will give it. And there was one point in her book where she said something along the lines of being radically hospitable. We are taking the hands of those that need care and putting them in the hands of Jesus. 1 Peter 4 says, therefore be self-controlled and sober-minded. For the sake of your prayers, above all, keep loving one another earnestly, since love covers a multitude of sins. Show hospitality to one another without grumbling. As each has received a gift, use it to serve one another as good stewards of God's varied grace. Whoever serves, serve as one who serves by the strength that God supplies, in order that everything God may be glorified through Jesus Christ. And that's our goal, isn't it? To glorify Christ. We don't know what it's going to look like for us yet, but we've made a start because we've been starting to invite people into our home, people from church who started to disciple others, and we share things that the Lord has taught us with them. And when we fellowship with others, we help clean up or anything else that needs to get done, as long as there's not a baby crying. And we have started to get to know our neighbors. And we're excited to see what God has in store for us and what our next step should be. So.
Awesome.